the 1960s, when the USA was involved in a frenetic space race with Russia, billions of dollars were invested in research and development by the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, here in the United States. The goal was to be the first to land on the moon. In the process of reaching that goal, NASA produced over 2,000 inventions or new technologies that impacted modern living. The infrared thermometers we got so used to as we entered shops during COVID were one of those spin-off technologies. The CMOS image sensors that allow us to have cameras in our phones, cordless vacuum cleaners, GPS, LED lighting, and more were all spin-off technology from space exploration. In one sense, even if we have never made it to the moon, the process and what it produced would have been world-changing. Now, the same thing is true of the pursuit of a theological center in New Testament biblical theology. No one has ever been able to arrive at a center, at the suggestion of a theological center that is totally defensible. However, the pursuit of a center has generated a lot of spin-off insight. It has been phenomenally heuristic. Every time a center is proposed, it must be legitimized through a detailed study of the way scriptures fit together. In the end, even if a particular suggestion falls short, the study that surrounds it produces greater insight into the fabric, the pattern, the weave of the scriptures. And so it's a valuable pursuit. Now, by definition, a theological center is the preeminent theological concept or the unifying theme developed in the Old Testament, the New Testament, a particular book, or the Bible as a whole. Walter Kaiser, Old Testament theologian, describes it as a key to an orderly and progressive arrangement of the subjects, themes, and teachings of the Old Testament, or we could say of the Bible as a whole. Identifying a theological center is, as Wenham says, an attempt to demonstrate that there is agreement among the New Testament authors on how different elements that make up their theologies fit together, and that there is unity and a coherence of the New Testament theology as a whole. But many scholars see the pursuit of a theological center as a fool's mission. For them, the Bible's diversity undermines the search for a singular or unified set of theological themes. So, we must consider at the start of this discussion whether it is reasonable to think the New Testament has a coherent message or unifying theological center. After all, even conservatively speaking, we're talking about a collection of documents written by 9 different people from very different backgrounds over the span of 35 to 40 years. Now, I'm not sure that something I wrote 40 years ago would have a coherent message with something I wrote today. If the Bible is merely a collection of human writings, there's no reason one would expect the New Testament to have a unified message, and even less reason to think that the entire Bible has a unified message. So, in this discussion, everything hangs on what you believe about the Bible. Everything hangs on inspiration. If a person believes that the Bible is the product of divine inspiration, it's reasonable to think it has a single theological center, a set of unifying themes, a coherent plotline, or an underlying meta-narrative. The doctrine of inspiration leads one to expect theological coherence and a singular narrative or worldview. Now, granted, the Bible could be inspired and still not have a theological center. Think about this. It is entirely possible that God could have chosen to inspire a set of documents designed to deal with separate and unrelated issues. Prophetic instructions for different people at different times facing different problems. In which case, the Bible would be like a library on many subjects, all inspired, but not developing a unified theme or story. On this shelf, the books talk about human anatomy. On another shelf, they talk about geological formations. That could have happened. But even if it did, there would be an overarching narrative or worldview that would have guided the instructions given in these discrete revelations. Unlike the library illustration, all these unique and seemingly unrelated documents came from the same God. His singular character would have been evident in everything he said on any subject. The ethical teaching would be the same in every book, regardless of the subject addressed. Every book would paint a common picture of human experience and divine activity. Inspiration requires that level of theological coherence. So, though it is possible that the Bible is a set of inspired, ad hoc, or occasional documents without any central theological theme, I don't think that's what the Bible says about itself. The Bible seems to indicate that it does have a unified message or storyline, so that it's not like the library in my illustration. For example, in John 5:39, Jesus said the entire Old Testament had a unified message. He says, "These, the Old Testament scriptures, are they that testify about me." In Romans chapter 1 and verse 2, there's the indication that the good news was the message of the Old Testament prophets in the Holy Scriptures. In Romans 3:21, it says that one of the central themes of the Old Testament was a God righteousness to which the law and the prophets testify. Now, granted, the themes are all different, but the point is the same. The Bible does have a central message or a unifying storyline or something that connects all of these themes into one flow of thought. Beale, in his New Testament theology, argues the point like this. In Acts 20, 26-27, Paul says to the Ephesian elders that he is innocent of the blood of all men because he did not shrink from declaring the whole purpose of God. Paul summarized God's purposeful activity in salvation history over a three-year period and called it the whole purpose of God. Exactly what his purpose of that summary was is not clear, but he does call his summary profitable. He calls it the gospel of the grace of God and the kingdom. Thus, Paul appears to see a basic deposit, a heart, a core, a center, which does not nullify but rather serves the other variegated details of the Bible. This deposit provides an order and illumination of the various big biblical details so that when Paul leaves, the Ephesians can reflect further on those details and gain greater clarity about them through the lens of the summarized deposit. So, all of these passages indicate that the scriptures themselves urge us to think in terms of a theological center or unifying theme or some flow of thought that is common throughout the entire Bible. I want to finish by talking about three different ways that scholars have tried to demonstrate the unity of the flow of thought and theology through the entire Bible. The first is the single center approach. In this approach, it is the approach really that has consumed the efforts of conservative scholars for generations, and it continues today. Each attempt, though inconclusive, has been nonetheless profitable. Now, here's some of the proposals that have been made with regard to a theological center through the Bible or the New Testament. Eichrodt suggested that covenant was the concept that unified the entire Bible. He said the concept of covenant was given this central position in the religious thinking of the Old Testament so that by working outward from it, the structural unity of the Old Testament message might be made more readily visible. Beale suggests that the unifying theme, though he calls it a storyline, we'll talk about that in a minute, is in the New Testament is eschatology, the inauguration of the last days. And the movement toward the new creation reign. For him, the key word here key phrase is the idea of last days. Kaiser argues that the central theme is the promised plan of God. Boltman argued that it was anthropology. Wenham sees it as the divine mission to the world. Now, when one considers all the theories and explanations behind them, it's easy to see why Wenham says the question of the center and structure of the New Testament theology is then important, but it is not easy to answer. Again, the search has been inconclusive, but it is nonetheless profitable. Now, another approach to this whole issue of what unifies the Bible has been the idea of multiple themes. Charles Scooby describes it in this way. He says, the procedure that seems to offer the most promise and the least risk of distorting the biblical material is that of identifying a limited number of major biblical themes and grouping them in around associated sub-themes and tracing each theme and sub-theme through the Old Testament and then the New Testament. Now, the way he does this, he takes as his overarching framework the idea of proclamation, promise, fulfillment, and consummation. So in the Old Testament, you have proclamation, God declaring the way things should be. You have promise, God promising that the way they should be will ultimately happen. Fulfillment in the New Testament, and then consummation when the already but not yet is finally realized. And so he breaks that framework up into different themes, and it's quite an ingenious approach and a very profitable approach. He sees the major themes as God's order, God's servant, God's people, and God's way. And so in the Old Testament, there's the proclamation of God's order, and then there's the promise of a new order, and then there is the fulfillment of that through Christ's coming. All the promises of God are yes and amen in Him, and then ultimately the consummation. And he follows that through with God's servants, and with God's people, and with God's way through the entire Bible. Now, the genius of this is that it's like many strands of a rope, all woven together, so you have one rope and you can see how they all work together. Another thing that is very interesting about Scooby's approach is that it demonstrates the inseparable connection between the Old Testament and the New Testament. It's really a great book if you can get it, The Ways of Our God. Now, one of the more recent approaches to this unified approach to the Bible has been that of storyline or plotline. Scholars like Wright and Beale prefer the language of storyline to the language of center. Their goal is to follow a singular storyline through the entire Bible. And this is a very useful approach. Again, it allows for some of the diversity, but it shows the unity that flows through the Bible. The storyline approach does make it easier to count for all of the parts and not just some of the parts in this whole approach to the unity of the Bible and the central flow of thought in the Bible. Now, it's important that you work at identifying the flow of thought, the center, the storyline, or unifying themes in every book that you study and teach. It's a worthwhile effort. The center will reveal itself through an inductive study of the Scriptures. So everything that you've learned about hermeneutics and exegesis, you must use here in order to find the main flow of thought. It's tempting to force an arbitrary theological grid upon the witness of the New Testament, but this is always counterproductive since it blinds you to the issues that are genuinely in the text. Now, we talked about this and I illustrated it with that diagram when we were talking about the different methodologies. The pursuit of a theological center begins as a literary pursuit. We begin with the recognition that God ensconced His message in discrete bits of literature, and from there, it's important to evaluate the literature using sound interpretive approaches such as considering the genre, the literary devices, the inferential structure, the metaphorical significations. These literary bits and pieces ultimately give flesh to our understanding of the book's structure and argument, the book's storyline or plot. When you see the overall argument of a book or the overall plot of a book, then all of the parts make more sense. They're no longer random instructions and bits of information, but they all fit together to tell a singular or make a singular point or develop a singular topic. That big picture perspective is the key to all expository preaching. It's what leads your people to insight and to a confrontation with the moral authority of the Scriptures. So it's worth the effort to try and capture this picture. The center, the storyline of every book you teach should be something that you are looking for and something within which every message fits and every message then develops. Thank you.